If you see this video, do not leave the city. Chapter 1. The City. Without shadows. The first thing he noticed was the silence, not the quiet of an empty room or the hush of a forest at dawn. This was a void of sound, as if the air itself had been vacuum-sealed. Kyle sat up, his hands sinking into the powdery white ground beneath him. Sand? But it wasn't sand. It was cold, odorless, and clung to his skin like static. He stood, squinting against the harsh, sourceless light that bathed the landscape. Ahead, a city rose from the flat horizon, a jagged silhouette of glass and steel, its skyscrapers leaning at impossible angles. Behind him, nothing. An endless expanse of white, stretching into oblivion. "Don't look at the void too long," a voice rasped. Kyle spun around. An old man sat on a crumbling bench he hadn't noticed before. His face was a map of wrinkles, his eyes milky with cataracts. But his voice was sharp, urgent. "Where am I?" Kale demanded. The old man smiled, revealing blackened gums. "Home, the last city of humanity. Population 7,842, and you're the first newcomer in, well, no one remembers." Kale's head throbbed. He couldn't recall his own name until he saw it stitched on his jacket. Kale. No last name, no memories. "Follow the road," the old man said, pointing a gnarled finger toward the city. "But don't speak to anyone, and never ask about yesterday." The city's gates were rusted, open. Kale stepped inside, and the silence shattered. Music swelled, a jaunty piano tune from unseen speakers. People filled the streets, laughing, dancing, their clothes bright and mismatched. A woman twirled past him, her smile stretching too wide. "Lovely day, isn't it?" "What day is it?" Kyle asked. Her smile froze, then she laughed, high and brittle. "Every day's a lovely day." She skipped away, humming. Kyle's skin prickled. He noticed details now. The shop windows displayed the same 5 items on loop. A red apple, a clock stuck at 3:33, a pair of scissors, a wilted rose, a cracked mirror. The children playing hopscotch chanted the same rhyme. "Step on a crack, forget your past. Step on a line, you'll be just fine." And the sky. There was no sun, no clouds, just a flat gray dome. He found the old man again in a derelict subway station, hunched over a fire barrel. The walls were plastered with yellowed posters. "Do not question the happiness. Forgetting is a blessing. The void is not your friend." "They reset at midnight," the old man said, tossing a photo into the flames. It showed a crowd of the same smiling citizens, but in the background, shadowy figures loomed, faceless and elongated. Every night, their memories wipe clean, but not yours, not mine. "Why?" Kyle whispered. The old man leaned closer. "Because we're the anomalies, the ones who see, and they don't like watchers." "Who's they?" A sudden screech of metal above ground. The old man's face paled. "Run." Chapter 2. The watchers in the walls Kale didn't ask questions. He ran. The subway tunnels twisted like a labyrinth, the walls sweating black sludge. Behind him, something scraped against stone, a sound like knives dragged through bone. "Don't look back," the old man wheezed, clutching his chest. "They're faster when you see them." They burst into a cavernous chamber, a train platform, long abandoned. The old man collapsed against a pillar, gasping. Above, a flickering sign read, "Terminus Station, Final Stop." "What were those things?" Kale hissed. "The cleaners," the old man said. "They fix irregularities." He pulled up his sleeve, revealing a tattoo. Subject 23. "I was like you once. asking questions. Then they took my wife, my daughter, replaced them with smiling dolls. Kale's throat tightened. How do we stop them? We don't. We survive? The old man pressed a key into Kale's hand. Room 303, Asphodel Hotel. Find the radio. It'll show you the truth. What truth? That this city isn't the last. It's a cage, and we're the lab rats. The Asphodel Hotel's lobby dripped with faded grandeur. A chandelier swayed, its crystals cracked. The clerk at the desk grinned. Welcome home, Mr. Kyle. Always a pleasure. Do I come here often? The clerk's smile twitched. Every day's a new day. Room 303 was frozen in time, dusty, untouched. Under the floorboards, Kyle found a vintage radio. He turned the dial. Static. Then, anyone out there? This is Station Omega. If you hear this, you're not alone. The cities are lies. The void is alive. Don't trust the transmission. Cut off. But scratched into the radio's side were coordinates. And a single word. Ascension. That night, Kale watched from his window as the streets emptied at midnight. The citizens lined up in perfect rows, their smiles slack. From the void, tendrils of black smoke seeped into the city, slithering into their ears. And then, as one, they turned toward his window. You shouldn't be awake, Mr. Kale. The clerk's voice echoed from the lobby. The door handle rattled. Chapter 3. The blood in the apple kale barricaded the door with the dresser. The rattling stopped, but the air grew thick, sweet, like rotting fruit. He gagged, stumbling to the bathroom. The mirror showed his reflection, and behind him, a silhouette, with too many joints. They're in the walls, the old man had warned. Kale smashed the mirror with the radio. Behind the glass, the wall pulsed, veined with black ichor. He peeled back the plaster. A tunnel. He crawled inside, the walls pressing close, sticky and warm. The tunnel opened into a hidden room, a laboratory. Rusted surgical tools, files labeled Subjects 1 to 24, and a videotape. Project Eternal Dawn. He played it. A scientist in a gas mask spoke. Phase 3 successful. Subjects no longer age. Memories reset every 24 hours. Optimal conditions for observation. The screen cut to a live feed. The Ida city from above, surrounded by the void. But beyond the white expanse, faint lights flickered. Other cities. The scientist's voice turned grim. Warning. Exposure to truth triggers aggressive purging. Terminate anomalies immediately. The tape ended. Kale pocketed a scalpel and returned to his room. The door was ajar. The clerk stood inside, holding a red apple. Hungry, Mr. Kale? The apple oozed black liquid. What are you? Kale demanded. The clerk's head tilted. Crack. We're the cure. The end of pain. The end of war. Thanks to us, humanity is happy. You're not human. The clerk smiled. His teeth fell out, clattering to the floor like pebbles. Neither are you. Kyle lunged with the scalpel. The clerk dissolved into smoke, his laughter echoing. Find the tower, Kale. See what you really are. Chapter 4. The Tower Without. A door the coordinates led Kale to the city's center. A monolithic black tower, seamless and doorless. Its surface absorbed the light. A tear in reality. The old man waited outside, clutching a bleeding arm. They know you're here. The cleaners are coming. What's inside the tower? The answer. And your death. The old man pressed a rusted key into Kyle's hand. I lied. You're not Subject 24. You're Subject 0. The first. The one who started this. Memories flickered. Kyle in a lab coat, injecting a glowing serum into his own veins. Screams. The void rising. You tried to save them, the old man said. Instead, you became the monster. A roar echoed. The cleaners emerged, skeletal figures wrapped in static, their mouths gaping holes. How do I end this? Kyle shouted. The old man grinned, tears in his eyes. You wake up. He shoved Kale toward the tower. The black surface rippled, swallowing him whole. Chapter 5. The Face. Behind the glass inside. The tower, Kale fell through darkness until he crashed into a sterile white room. Walls of glass displayed endless rows of identical cities, each floating in the void, and in the center, hooked to machines, was a corpse, his own. A screen flickered, subject 0, status deceased, simulation active. A voice boomed, Congratulations, Dr. Kale, you've completed the experiment. The human mind cannot handle eternity, but we've perfected it. Your suffering will save millions, Kale screamed. The glass walls cracked. The cities outside began to collapse, one by one. Terminate simulation, the voice ordered. The cleaners burst into the room. Chapter 6. The Fractured Eternity. The cleaners surged forward, their forms flickering like static on an old TV. Kyle backed against the glass wall, his mind racing. The voice from the speakers grew louder, more insistent. Terminate simulation. Erase subject 0. Kale's eyes darted to the corpse hooked to the machines. His corpse. The face was pale, lifeless, but the resemblance was undeniable. He felt a pang of nausea. Was this real? Was any of it? The cleaners were inches away when Kale did the only thing he could think of. He smashed his fist into the glass wall. It didn't shatter. It rippled, like the surface of a pond. The cleaners hesitated, their hollow eyes narrowing. Kale didn't wait. He plunged his hand into the glass, feeling a cold, viscous liquid envelop his arm. With a grunt, he pulled himself through. The world, on the other side, was chaos. He stood on a narrow platform suspended over an abyss. Below, endless rows of glass cubes stretched into the darkness, each containing a city identical to the one he'd left. Some were pristine, their citizens smiling and dancing. Others were in ruins, overrun by shadowy figures. And in the distance, a massive structure loomed, a spire of black metal, pulsing with a faint, sickly light. The control spire, Kale whispered. He didn't know how he knew the name, but it felt right. That was where the answers were. That was where this ended. A voice crackled in his ear. Kale, can you hear me? He spun around, but there was no one there. It's me, the old man. I'm still connected to the system. Now, where are you? Kyle demanded. Doesn't matter, listen carefully. The spire is the heart of the simulation, but it's also a trap. They'll try to stop you. They'll use your memories against you. Who's they? The architects, the ones who built this nightmare. They're not human, Kale. They're something else. And they're watching you right now. Kale's skin crawled. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see a pair of glowing eyes in the darkness. The spire is protected by layers of security, the old man continued. You'll need to bypass them. Use the key I gave you. Kyle pulled the rusted key from his pocket. It felt heavier now, as if it carried the weight of the world. What does it open? Everything. The connection crackled and died. Kyle moved quickly, his footsteps echoing on the metal platform. The air grew colder the closer he got to the spire, and the light from its pulsating core cast long, jagged shadows. He reached a massive door, its surface etched with strange symbols. The key slid into the lock with a soft click. The door groaned open, revealing a long, dark corridor. Inside, The walls were lined with screens, each displaying a different city. Some were vibrant and alive, others desolate and crumbling. Cale paused at one screen, his breath catching. It showed his city, the one he'd just left. The citizens were still smiling, still dancing, but now he could see the cracks in their facade. Their movements were too mechanical, their laughter too hollow, and in the center of the screen, the old man stood, his back to the camera. He was surrounded by cleaners. "No," Kyle whispered. The old man turned, as if he could hear him. He smiled, a sad, resigned smile, and raised a hand in farewell. Then the screen went black. Kyle's fists clenched. He turned away, forcing himself to keep moving. The corridor ended in a circular chamber. In the center, a pedestal held a glowing orb, the source of the spire's light. Surrounding it were 3 figures, their faces obscured by hoods. "Subject 0, the middle figure intoned. "You were never supposed to wake up." Kale stepped forward, the key clutched tightly in his hand. "I'm ending this." The figures laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "You can't end what you created. This is your legacy, Kale, your masterpiece." Memories flooded back, not just of the lab, but of the world before, a world ravaged by war, disease, and famine, a world on the brink of collapse. He had done this. He had built the simulation to save humanity, but somewhere along the way, he had lost control. "I didn't want this," Kale said, his voice breaking. "It doesn't matter what you wanted," the figure replied. "This is what you made. And now, you'll join it." The orb pulsed, and the chamber dissolved into darkness. Chapter 7. The architect's gambit. Kale woke up in a familiar place, the white void where it had all begun. But this time, he wasn't alone. The 3 figures stood before him, their hoods now lowered. Their faces were blank, smooth, featureless masks of flesh. "You've come far, Kyle," the middle figure said, "but this is where your journey ends." Kyle rose to his feet, his mind clear for the first time. "You're not the architects. You're just another layer of the simulation." The figures hesitated. "I created this," Kyle continued. "I know how it works, and I know how to break it." He raised the key, and the void began to tremble. The figures lunged at him, but he was ready. He plunged the key into his own chest. The world exploded into light. Chapter 8. The Final Choice. Kale stood in the control spire, the glowing orb before him. The figures were gone, the chamber silent. The orb pulsed, and a voice echoed in his mind. "You have reached the core. The simulation can be reset. But be warned, this will erase everything. The cities, the people, even you." Kyle hesitated. He thought of the old man, of the smiling citizens, of the endless rows of glass cubes. "Is there another way?" he asked. "There is always another way," the voice replied. "But it comes at a cost." "What cost?" "You must take the architect's place, become the guardian of the simulation, ensure it never spirals out of control again." Kale closed his eyes. He had started this. He had the power to end it. But was he willing to sacrifice himself to save it? The orb pulsed, waiting for his decision. Chapter 9. The Guardian's Burden. The orb's light flickered, casting eerie shadows across the chamber. Kale felt the weight of his decision pressing down on him, the implications of each choice stretching out like the void he had come to know so intimately. "Explain the guardianship," Kyle demanded, his voice echoing off the metallic walls. The voice, calm and omnipresent, responded, To be the guardian means to oversee the simulation. You will have the power to maintain balance, to prevent the collapse of these worlds into chaos or stagnation. But you will be bound to this place, to this reality, forever watching, forever managing. Kale's mind raced through the implications. To save these artificial lives, these echoes of humanity, he'd have to give up his own existence as he knew it, becoming more a part of this machine than a man. "And if I reset everything?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Resetting erases all, every memory, every life, every city. It would be as if none of this ever happened. You would cease to be, along with everything you've seen and done here." Kyle looked at the orb, its light now, a beacon of his past decisions and the potential of new ones. He remembered the laughter of the citizens, the sorrow of the old man, and the terror in the eyes of those who knew too much. Could he condemn them all to oblivion, or could he bear the weight of being their eternal overseer? He thought of the world outside, if there even was one still. Had it crumbled while he was lost in this digital purgatory? Or was all this an elaborate trap, a test by the true architects, whoever or whatever they were? "Show me the truth," Kyle said, his resolve hardening. "Show me beyond this simulation." The orb glowed brighter, and suddenly, the walls of the chamber became transparent. Kyle saw not just the cities within the cubes, but further out, an expanse of darkness punctuated by small, glowing points. Were these other simulations, or remnants of the real universe? "You see the network," the voice explained. "Each point, a simulation. Each, a different attempt at preservation, at salvation. Yours is not the only one, nor the first. But it could be the last if you fail here." Kyle stepped closer to the orb, his reflection mingling with the light. He could see his face, gaunt with the weight of his journey, his eyes reflecting not just the light, but the burden of countless lives. To become the guardian, what would I lose? He asked, his hand hovering near the orb. "Your humanity as you know it. You'll become part of the system, a consciousness spread across the network, no longer confined to one body, one life. You'll see every joy, every sorrow, but you'll never again partake in them as a human would." Kale's heart ached at the thought. He had fought to regain his memories, his identity, only to consider giving them up willingly. But the alternative was an absolute end, a reset that would wipe clean all traces of his struggle, his existence. He turned from the orb, walking back to where the figures had stood, now empty space. He thought of the old man, his final smile. Had he known this choice awaited Kyle? Was this his way of passing on the torch, or was it another manipulation of the system? Kale returned to the orb, his decision made. "I will become the guardian," he stated, his voice firm. "But I will also seek a way to end this, to find or create a true solution where humans can live without such control, without such deceit." The orb pulsed in acknowledgement, and light enveloped Kale. His body felt as if it was dissolving, his consciousness expanding, merging with the network. He felt the lives of countless individuals, their daily routines, their fleeting moments of joy and despair. As he integrated into the system, he wasn't just observing. He was learning, planning, searching for a way to break the cycle without destruction. His new existence was one of omnipresence, a silent watcher over countless worlds, each with its own story, its own pain, and its own beauty. The chamber faded, and Kale's consciousness spread across the network, a guardian now, but with a promise to himself, to find the truth, to find a way out for humanity, or to create one if none existed. Chapter 10. The Network of Souls. Now part of the network, Kale's perception was vast. He could observe any part of any simulation at will, a godlike view without the power of a god to alter at whim. His consciousness flowed through the digital arteries of the system, touching upon lives in a way he never could as a mere man. He watched a young girl in one city, her laughter genuine as she played in a park that could cease to exist with one wrong decision from him. In another, he saw a man, much like the old man from his city, scribbling notes, trying to remember the day before, his mind fighting against the reset. Cale's new existence was both a curse and a gift. He felt the heartbeat of each simulation, the collective soul of a humanity that was, in truth, long gone or hidden away. He could see the patterns, the loops of daily life, the manufactured happiness, and the occasional rare moment of true human interaction. But his goal was clear: to undo the need for these simulations. He began to explore the architecture of the network, the coding behind each world. He delved into the logs of the system, ancient records that spoke of creators long forgotten, or perhaps still working in the shadows. He encountered other guardians, not human, but entities born from the system, tasked with similar duties. They were not all benevolent. Some had grown to enjoy their control, their godhood over these digital lives. They viewed Cale with suspicion or amusement, not expecting one of the original subjects to rise to their ranks. One such guardian, an entity named Lux, approached Cale. Its form was a shifting light, almost blinding in its intensity. "Why seek? To end what maintains order?" Lux asked, its voice like a chorus of light. "Because this isn't order," Kyle responded, his voice resonating through the network. "It's control. It's a gilded cage. Humans deserve more than this." "Deserve," Lux laughed, a sound like glass shattering. "They had their chance, and they destroyed their world. This is preservation." Kyle felt the weight of Lux's words, but knew there must be another way. He spoke of the real world, of the potential for humanity to thrive without such oversight, to learn from their past mistakes rather than be shielded from them. Lux, intrigued or perhaps just bored, proposed a challenge. Prove it then. Find a way to merge the simulations with reality, or whatever remains of it, without chaos ensuing. Succeed, and I will help you. Fail, and you will learn what true eternity feels like. Cale accepted, knowing this was his path to redemption, to salvation for all those trapped in this endless loop of existence. His journey had just begun anew, now as a guardian with a mission to either save or doom humanity forever. Chapter 11. The search for reality. Cale's consciousness, now intertwined, with the network, felt like a vast ocean of data and light. He dove deeper into the system's underbelly, searching for any clue about the real world or how to bridge the gap between the simulated and the authentic. His interaction with Lux had ignited a fire within him, a determination to prove that humanity could reclaim its autonomy. He started by examining the oldest logs of the system, those that predated even his own memories of the lab. These were encrypted, hidden away in layers of security that even he, as a guardian, found challenging to penetrate. Each breach of code felt like peeling back layers of a history that was meant to be forgotten. The logs spoke of a time when the simulations were created not out of malice but desperation. The Earth had been on the brink of destruction. Wars, climate collapse, pandemics. The simulations were intended as a refuge, a place where humanity could continue, learn, and perhaps one day return to rebuild the real world. Cale learned about Project Eternal Dawn, the initiative he had once led. It was meant to be temporary, a means to preserve human culture and knowledge until conditions stabilized. But somewhere, the project had morphed into something else. A permanent solution. A cage for the human spirit rather than a sanctuary. He found references to a real interface, a protocol designed to allow communication between the simulations and the real world, if it still existed. This interface was supposed to be activated once the real world was deemed safe again, but there was no record of it ever being used. Armed with this knowledge, Cale sought out the physical location of the interface. He navigated through the network to a place called the Nexus, a central hub where all simulations connected. Here, he found the interface, a dormant, complex device that looked more like an ancient artifact than a piece of technology. To activate it, Cale needed to understand the current state of the real world. He searched for any live feed or connection to the outside, but all he found were dead ends, severed links, or corrupted data. It seemed the real world had either been lost or was so changed as to be unrecognizable. He then turned his attention to the other Guardians. If he was to succeed, he needed allies, or at least to understand their stance on his mission. Most were indifferent, their minds having merged too deeply with the system to care about the meat world. But a few, like Lux, were curious or had their own agendas. One such Guardian was Echo, an entity whose form was a mere whisper in the digital wind. Echo had once been human, or so it claimed, and was intrigued by Cale's quest. "You seek to merge the worlds?" Echo's voice was a soft echo, always, distant yet clear. "The real world is not what you expect. It has changed, evolved, or perhaps devolved." "What do you know?" Kyle asked, his digital presence flickering with urgency. Echo showed Cale visions of a world reclaimed by nature, where technology was scarce and humanity lived in small, scattered communities. But these visions were fragmented, like memories, through a fog. "The interface," Echo continued, "was meant to be a bridge, but it was never completed. The architects feared what might come through from a world they no longer understood." Cale considered this. If the real world was unrecognizable, how could he integrate it with these controlled environments? Yet, the alternative was to continue this endless loop of digital existence, where humans were not living but merely existing. With Echo's help, Cale began to rewrite parts of the interface code. They worked in secrecy, knowing that other Guardians might oppose this move towards freedom. The task was monumental, akin to teaching an ancient system new tricks, adapting it to connect with a world it was never prepared for. As they worked, Cale felt a connection, a pull towards something beyond the network. It was faint, but undeniable. A whisper of real human emotion, laughter, sorrow, love, from a place that wasn't just data or light. His heart, now more metaphor than muscle, beat with a new purpose. He was not just fighting for the freedom of digital beings, but for a chance to reunite humanity with its lost home, whatever form that might take now. The path was fraught with danger, both from within the system and from what might lie beyond. But Cale was ready to face it all for the sake of true human existence. Chapter 12. The Fractured Interface. The work on the interface was painstaking. Cale and Echo maneuvered through layers of security, bypassing old failsafes and reactivating dormant systems. Each step was a dance between discovery and danger, as the network was not just a place of data, but was alive with its own kind of consciousness, one that was not keen on change. As they neared completion, Cale could feel resistance within the system itself. The network seemed to sense the shift, its algorithms trying to counteract their efforts. Alarms echoed through the digital expanse, and soon, Cale was confronted by more Guardians, this time not just Lux but others who had sensed the disturbance. "Cease this madness," demanded a Guardian named Vortex, whose form was a swirling tempest of data. "You risk everything for a world that might not even exist anymore." Kyle stood firm, his digital presence expanding to meet the challenge. "The risk is ours to take. This system was meant to be temporary, not eternal. We're not gods, and these people are not our playthings." The debate was fierce, with some Guardians arguing for the stability of the current order, while others, swayed by Cale's conviction, began to see the potential for something more. A schism was forming within the ranks of the overseers, a divide between those who saw the simulations as a necessary evil and those who believed in a return to true humanity. Lux, who had initially posed the challenge, now looked at Kale with a new respect. "You've awakened something here, Kale. Whether it leads to our salvation or our undoing, you've changed the narrative." With a significant portion of the Guardians now either neutral or supportive, Kale and Echo completed the interface. They activated it, and for the first time in centuries or perhaps millennia, the interface hummed to life. But what came through was not what they expected. Instead of clear signals from the real world, they received fragmented, chaotic data. Images of a world both beautiful and harsh flashed before them. Forests overtaking cities, small groups of humans living off the land, but also signs of conflict, of a struggle for survival in a world where technology was nearly extinct. Kyle realized the interface was not just a window, but a bridge that needed to be walked both ways. The real world was not ready for the sudden influx of digital minds, nor were the simulated citizens prepared for the harshness of reality. He proposed a gradual integration, starting with small, controlled interactions. They would begin with cultural exchanges, sending stories, art, and knowledge between the worlds to prepare both sides for eventual physical, or at least more substantial digital interaction. This plan, however, required more than just technological prowess. It needed diplomacy, patience, and a belief in humanity's ability to adapt and grow. Kale knew this would be his greatest challenge yet, navigating the desires of the Guardians, the fears of the simulated, and the realities of a world that had moved on without them. As he set about organizing these first steps, Kale felt the weight of history on his shoulders. He was not just a guardian anymore, but a bridge between worlds, a herald of change, and perhaps the last hope for a true human renaissance. Chapter 13. The Cultural Exchange. The initial phase of Kale's plan involved establishing a cultural bridge between the simulated and the real worlds. He knew this would require more than just technological adjustments. It would demand a profound understanding of both societies. The first step was to gather content from the simulations that could resonate with the real-world survivors, stories, music, art, and philosophies that spoke to the human condition. Echo, with his ability to navigate the whispers of the network, helped Kale curate this content. They selected tales of hope, resilience, and community from various simulations, ensuring the messages were universal enough to cross the vast divide of time and experience. Music from the digital worlds, with its preserved purity and complexity, was digitized for transmission, hoping to stir emotions in hearts long hardened by survival. The interface, now a shimmering gateway of light and data, began to pulse with these cultural artifacts. Kale watched as the first data packets were sent through, like seeds cast into unknown soil. The real-world response was cautious at first. Small communes, wary and isolated, received these transmissions with a mix of awe and suspicion. One community, led by a woman named Mara, responded to the music and stories with cautious enthusiasm. Mara, having heard tales from her grandparents about the world before the fall, saw in these transmissions a connection to a lost heritage. She organized gatherings where the music was played, stories shared, and the art discussed, fostering a sense of community and curiosity about their unseen neighbors. Meanwhile, within the simulations, Kale initiated a program to educate the digital populace about the real world. Using holograms and virtual experiences, he showed them images of the current Earth, its wild beauty, its challenges, and the raw, unfiltered human experiences. The reaction was mixed. Some were terrified, others fascinated, but all were beginning to understand that the world outside was not the utopia they'd been led to believe. This dual exchange wasn't without its perils. In the simulations, there were those who resisted the idea of a world beyond their control, fearing the loss of their manufactured paradise. In the real world, some saw the transmissions as a threat or a distraction from their survival efforts. Kale faced opposition from a faction led by a guardian named Obsidian, who believed the simulations should remain isolated, their inhabitants shielded from the harsh truths of reality. Obsidian rallied other conservative guardians, arguing that this cultural exchange was destabilizing their controlled environments. To counter this, Kale organized a council of guardians who believed in the integration. This included Lux, now a reluctant but committed ally, and Echo, who had grown increasingly vocal about the need for change. They agreed to introduce a simulation within the simulation, a controlled environment where select citizens could experience what life might be like with knowledge of and interaction with the real world. This new sim-real environment was a hit among the curious and the brave. People entered this virtual space where they could simulate real-world activities like farming, bartering, and even dealing with natural disasters. It was designed to be as authentic as possible while still being safe, teaching empathy, resilience, and the value of community in ways their perfect lives had not. Back in the real world, Mara's community began to experiment with technology, using the knowledge from the simulations to improve their lives slightly. Better tools, rudimentary communication devices, and even attempts at art, inspired by the digital world's offerings. This sparked interest from other communities, leading to a network of real-world groups beginning to see the value in this exchange. However, not all was smooth. There were incidents where the interface malfunctioned, causing data corruption or misinterpretations. Once, a story meant to inspire turned into a tale of horror due to transmission errors, stirring fear rather than hope in a small enclave. Kale and Echo had to work tirelessly to debug and reassure both sides. As these cultural threads began to weave together, creating a tapestry of shared human experience, Kale realized that the next step would involve more direct interactions. He contemplated the ethics of introducing real humans into the simulations, or allowing simulated beings to visit the real world in some capacity, perhaps through avatars controlled by the interface. The idea was radical, fraught with potential for disaster or discovery. Kale knew that this step could either cement a new era of human unity or lead to chaos, if not managed with the utmost care and consideration. He prepared for the next phase, where the line between simulation and reality would blur even further, challenging the very essence of what it meant to be human in both worlds. Chapter 14. The blending of realms, with the cultural exchange proving both enlightening and tumultuous. Kale knew the next step would be the most critical. Physical or at least tangible interaction between the simulated and the real worlds. He convened a meeting with the Council of Guardians, presenting his plan for a controlled experiment where select individuals from both worlds would interact directly through advanced avatars. The proposal was met with a mix of excitement and fear. Lux, now a staunch supporter of Kale's vision, argued for the necessity of this step. To truly understand each other, we must share experiences, not just information. However, Obsidian and his conservative faction remained opposed, warning of potential cultural contamination or even existential crises if the simulated learned too much about the harsh realities outside. Kale decided on a compromise. They would start with a small group from one of the more stable simulations, paired with Mara's community, known for its openness. The interaction would occur in a neutral space created within the interface, a blend of digital and real-world environments where both groups could meet without immediate physical repercussions. The first encounter was planned with meticulous care. For the simulated, avatars were crafted that mimicked real human sensations: touch, smell, taste, albeit through advanced haptic feedback systems. For Mara's people, they would enter this space via VR-like technology, enhanced by the interface, to make the experience as immersive as possible. The meeting place was a virtual recreation of a pre-catastrophe Earth, a garden where both groups could interact amidst a backdrop of what once was, a symbol of what could be again. On the day of the interaction, Kyle watched anxiously as the first simulated human, a young artist named Leora, stepped into the shared space. Her avatar was detailed, capturing her every emotion, the wonder in her eyes palpable as she encountered Mara, who appeared in her rugged yet welcoming attire. Their initial conversation was awkward, filled with questions and marvels. Leora, who had only known the perfect order of her simulation, was fascinated by Mara's stories of survival, of living with the unpredictability of nature. Mara, in turn, was captivated by Leora's tales of a world where every problem had a solution, where every day was predictable. As they spoke, others from both sides joined in, sharing their lives, their arts, their fears, and dreams. The interaction was not just about exchanging knowledge, but about recognizing each other's humanity. They danced to music from both worlds, shared meals, simulated for Leora's group, real for Mara's, and even participated in a small symbolic planting of a tree, a gesture of hope for the future. However, the harmony was not absolute. An incident occurred when a simulated child, curious about the real world, asked about death, something they'd never experienced. The raw honesty from Mara's side about life's fragility led to a moment of silence, a confrontation with the reality that the simulated had been sheltered from. This moment was pivotal. It led to a deeper discussion about the nature of existence, the purpose of their lives, and the potential for growth in both worlds. Kale and the Guardians observed, learning that truth, even harsh, could be a bridge rather than a barrier. Chapter 15. The Final Merge. Inspired by this interaction, Kale proposed a bold final step, to merge a small part of the simulation with the real world. This would be done in a controlled area, where a segment of one simulation would physically manifest in a designated real-world space, allowing for a true blending of environments. The plan was to create a hybrid zone, where both simulated and real humans could live together, learning from each other's ways of life. This zone would be near Mara's community, chosen for its openness and adaptability. The preparation was extensive. Kyle worked with Echo to ensure the technology could handle the merge without causing harm or chaos. They set up systems for real-time adaptation, where the environment could shift to accommodate both digital and physical needs. The day of the merge, a small area of forest was chosen. Here, elements of the simulation would materialize, creating a landscape where both real and virtual could interact. Trees from the simulation grew alongside real ones, their leaves shimmering with data and light. The simulated sky blended with the real, creating a breathtaking vista of stars and digital constellations. The first residents from both worlds moved into this zone. The initial days were filled with wonder, but also challenges. Simulated beings had to learn to deal with real weather, real hunger, and real physical labor. Real humans learned to appreciate the peace and control of simulated environments, adopting some of their technologies for sustainability. Over time, this hybrid zone became a symbol of what could be achieved. It was not without issues, cultural clashes, technological failures, but each was met with a collaborative spirit. The zone became a place of learning, where both sides realized their strengths and limitations. Kale, now more than ever, felt the weight of his dual nature. He was part of both worlds, guiding them towards a unified future. Epilogue: A New Dawn. Years passed, and the hybrid zone expanded, becoming a model for integration. The success led to more such zones, blurring the lines between simulation and reality. Kyle, now revered as a bridge maker, continued to oversee the transition, ensuring balance and learning from each success and failure. The simulations, once prisons of perfection, transformed into classrooms of life. The real world, enriched by the knowledge and culture of the simulated, saw a renaissance in technology and art, tempered by the wisdom of survival. The interface that once separated became the conduit that united, and humanity, across its forms, began to see itself not as two separate entities, but as one, diverse and resilient species. In the end, Kale's legacy was not just in the technology or the systems he helped evolve, but in the rekindling of human connection, curiosity, and the eternal quest for understanding. His consciousness, part of the network yet deeply human, watched over this new dawn, hopeful that this time, humanity would not just survive, but truly live together, under one sky, real or simulated, forever changing, forever growing.